Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. Today we're here in docket number 2021-15-C through 2021-23-C. Today is March 15th. It is 10:02 a.m. We're here for oral arguments. Before we proceed, please join me in a brief moment of silence. Thank you very much. Let's take roll. Here in the commission room, we have Commissioners Powers and Caston. We also have Vice Chair Belzer and Chairman Williams. Joining us virtually, we have Commissioner Williams, Commissioner Thomas, and Commissioner Irvin. Attorney Butler, are there any preliminary matters that we need to take up before we take appearances from the parties?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, I'll be glad to read the docket for you at this time, if appropriate.
Please proceed.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and other members of the commission. Before the commission today are virtual oral arguments regarding requests for expedited consideration by the commission of the following dockets. Docket number 2021-15-C is the application of CarolinaConnect Cooperative Incorporated for designation as an eligible telecommunications carrier in the state of South Carolina. Docket number 2021-16-C, the application of TricoLink Incorporated for designation as an eligible telecommunications carrier in the state of South Carolina. Docket number 2021-17-C, application of Sandhill Connections LLC for designation as an eligible telecommunications carrier in certain census blocks in Chesterfield County for the purposes of receiving federal rural digital opportunity fund support and a request for waiver of certain commission regulations. Docket number 2021-18C, application of Starlink Services LLC for designation as an eligible telecommunications carrier for purposes of receiving the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund support and a request for expedited consideration. Docket number 2021-19C, application of Palmetto Telephone Communications LLC for designation as an eligible telecommunications carrier in certain census blocks in Charleston County for purposes of receiving the RDOF Phase 1 support. Docket number 21-21-C is the application of Ori Telephone Cooperative Incorporated for designation as an eligible telecommunications carrier in certain census blocks in Georgetown and Marion counties for purposes of receiving the RDOF Phase 1 support. Docket number 2021-22-C, the application of Aiken Electric Cooperative Incorporated for designation as an eligible telecommunications carrier pursuant to Section 214E of the Communications Act of 1934. And docket number 2021-23-C, the joint application of Charter FiberLink South Carolina-CCO LLC and Time Warner Cable Information Services South Carolina LLC for designation as an eligible telecommunications carrier to receive the RDOF funds support for voice and broadband services and request for expedited consideration. And Mr. Chairman, just to note for the record, originally the commission also had docket number 2021-20-C, which was the application of WC Fiber LLC, also for designation as an eligible telecommunications carrier. But this docket has been administratively closed at the request of the applicant. Mr. Chairman, the virtual oral arguments are set to begin at 10 a.m. on Monday, March 15th, 2021, before the commission, and the dockets are in order.
All right. Thank you very much, Attorney Butler. So just make sure I can cross docket number 2021-20-C off my list. That docket has been administratively closed at the request of the applicant, correct?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
All right. Thank you, sir. All right, ladies and gentlemen, when you hear your name, please introduce yourself and anyone that's with you. We're going to start with CarolinaConnect Cooperative Incorporated.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I'm David Black with Nixon Pruitt, and I represent CarolinaConnect Cooperative.
Good morning, Attorney Black. Thank you for joining us. is it just you, Mr. Black, or do you have Mr. Lantor and Mr. Martin with you?
It's just me this morning.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Attorney Black. Next, we have Trico Link Incorporated.
Yes, sir. This is John Felder, Senior. I'm here as attorney, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. I'm attorney for Trico Link. And I have Mr. Louder with me, who's CEO of the company.
Good morning.
All right, Mr. Felder, pleasure to meet you this morning. If you could do me a favor and turn your camera on.
Okay, we're getting it. Yes, sir. There we go. Sorry. Thank you.
All right. Okay. So, okay, Mr. Felder, could you have your client spell his name for our court reporter?
LOWDER.
Louder. LOWDER. All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Next, we have Sandhill Connections, LLC.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. This is Carrie DeVere with Herman & Whitaker, LLC, and Robin Tuttle, who just rejoined, is also representing Sandhill Connections along with me.
Thank you. I've been having some technical difficulties, so I had to rejoin.
All right. Well, good morning, ladies. Thank you for joining us. Starlink Services, LLC.
Mr. Chairman, this is Charlie Terraney. I'm here for Starlink Services LLC.
Good morning, Mr. Rainey. Good to see you again. Palmetto Telephone Communications, LLC.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I'm Peg Fox with the firm of Burr and Foreman LLP. I'm here representing Palmetto Telephone Communications LLC, and also I am representing Ori Telephone Cooperative, which is the next one on the list.
All right. Thank you, Attorney Fox. And the record will reflect that Attorney Fox represents Ori Telephone Cooperative Incorporated as well. We're going to go to Aiken Electric Cooperative Incorporated.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. This is Frank Ellerby of the Robinson Gray Law Firm. I'm representing Aiken Electric Cooperative this morning and pleased to be with y'all.
Good to see you, Mr. Ellerby. Thanks for joining us. Next, we have Charter FiberLink and Time Warner Cable.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. My name is Mitchell Willoughby with the law firm of Willoughby and Hafer. With me is Andrew D'Antoni, also of the law firm of Willoughby and Hafer. And we also have with us this morning Ben Brazil, who is Director of State Governmental Affairs for Charter here in South Carolina. So the three of us will be pleased to appear before the commission today for this oral argument.
Thank you for joining us, gentlemen. Last but certainly not least, the Office of Regulatory Staff.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Today for RRS, Leslie Hammond. We also have Alex Knowles and Jenny Pittman.
Thank you, Attorney Hammond. For some reason or another, your volume is low.
Is this better, Mr. Chairman?
It's a little bit better, but you may, if you all have comments or questions or objections, you may want to get as close as possible to the microphone so our court reporter can accurately take down what you say. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's who we have joining us for this virtual oral arguments. It does not appear as if there are any preliminary matters. Seeing that there are none, we will start with CarolinaConnect Cooperative Incorporated.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, good morning. I'm David Black from Nexum Pruitt, and I represent CarolinaConnect. In terms of Procedural background about CarolinaConnect. CarolinaConnect was formed back in 2016. The electric cooperative saw a need within their rural service territory for broadband, and we currently serve around 10,000 customers within Newberry service territory and Mid-Carolina electric service territory. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, we're here today on the review for expedited consideration of the applications. CarolinaConnect is also requesting their application receive expedited review. Expedited review of the ETC applications will result in RDOF Phase 1 funding getting to CarolinaConnect more quickly. And when we look at how that happened in the past, that's extremely important in terms of who's at the front of the line to get the funding. This isn't just a South Carolina project. There's applications across the nation. Looking at the FCC's RDOF Phase 1 auction rules, they require that winning bidders obtain their ETC designation within 180 days of the FCC's public notice announcing all winning RDOF Phase 1 winning bidders. That notice from the FCC requires, quote, consistent with CAF Phase 2 auction rules, one bidder in the RDOF auction will be permitted to obtain its ET designation after the close of the auction, submitting proof within 180 days that the public notice identifying the winning bidders. The FCC public notice was released on December 7, 2020, which runs our date to June 7, 2021 to obtain the ETC designation. So time is of the essence, and it's extremely important that we have expedited review. Looking at how this type of process applied in the past, following the FCC's Connect America Fund Phase 2 auction in 2018, that's a prior FCC reverse auction. The CAF 2 winning bidders that were granted ETC designation shortly after the CAF 2 auction by their state commissions, they were typically at the front of the line in terms of being granted their CAF 2 support distribution by the FCC. What does that mean? It means they got their funding quicker and they were able to start performing in an expedited manner. That same procedural process will be followed by the FCC for the RDOF Phase 1 bidders. As with the prior funding projects, the South Carolina PSC should expect several winning bidders in South Carolina to be awarded at or near the front of the line if the South Carolina PSC similarly acts in an expedited manner on that pending ETC applications. In terms of the question on certification, Mr. Butler let the parties know that may also be something that the commission may be hearing from each party. CarolinaConnect does not believe that it needs the separate certification, and I'll briefly go through that analysis. When we look at South Carolina Code 589200, that provision of the code indicates that a VoIP provider, voice over internet protocol provider, is a communication service provider, which is different. That's different than a telephone utility. Telephone utilities require a certificate of convenience and public necessity to operate in South Carolina. So to summarize, a telephone utility is a traditional telephone provider in South Carolina, i.e. a local exchange carrier or LAC, but not a VoIP provider like CarolinaConnect Cooperative. Next, when we look at the code 589200 definition section, there's a provision on communication service providers. And what that provides is that subsection D, so 589200 1D, a person or entity providing telephone, voice over internet protocol. So that's VoIP. If you're providing VoIP, you're a communication service provider. And then we look at subsection 2 of the same reg and the same statute. And what it states there is that a communication service means, subsection B, voice over internet protocol. I would also draw the commission's attention to the actual VoIP registration that CarolinaConnect filled out. That form has no such requirement. We believe that's a strong indication that registration is all that's needed for the VoIP form. There's no requirement in Chapter 103 of the South Carolina Code of Regulations, C 103-690, regarding designation of eligible telecommunication carriers to obtain a CPCN. If there was such a requirement, I would suspect the ORS would have brought it to our attention by now. Accordingly, CarolinaConnect respectfully requests that its application receive expedited review and that it's not required to apply for certification as is operating as a VoIP. To the extent that the Commission would like further information on CarolinaConnect, its application, or any of these other issues, we'd be happy to submit an expedited memorandum. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Black. Trico Link Incorporated. I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. Thank you,
Uh,
Mr. Chairman.
Attorney Felder,
Yes, sir.
if you would, wait 1 second before you proceed. Vice Chair Belzer.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Black had filed a motion for a waiver of a portion of, I believe it was 690C B. And does he want to address that now, or is he going to wait?
I'd be happy to address it now if you would like. We would respectfully request that motion be granted. We're serving in a smaller area, and such motions have been granted in the past.
Is that the legal basis? That such
Yes, ma'am.
motions have been granted in the past?
Well, it's I'm sorry, my audio was going out. I couldn't hear you, Ms. Belser.
I said, is that the legal basis that such motions have been granted in the past?
It's often waived, yes, ma'am.
All right.
We would ask that requirement be waived as it has been in the past for other providers to serve within a smaller area.
Okay. Would you just briefly explain what the smaller area is that y'all are seeking?
The area that we receive the funding in is within a subset of that area where we received the our service area. And to err on the side of caution, we filed that motion just to make sure that wasn't a further requirement.
Thank you.
To the extent it is a requirement, we'd ask that requirement be waived in terms of us serving within that area.
Thank you very much.
All right, Attorney Felder, if you would, please proceed, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. It's a pleasure to appear before you today, and we really appreciate the opportunity to be heard. Trico Link LLC respectfully request an expedited hearing and before the Commission. Before I get into the why of that, Trico Link LLC is a new entity that's been formed, and we operate as a subsidiary of Tri-County Electric Cooperative. I have Mr. Chad Lauder, the CEO of Trico Link, and who has filed direct testimony already with the Commission. And I would call the Commission's attention to his direct testimony. It outlines in there our capabilities of being able to serve and meet the demands of being an ETC if it is granted. We are very excited about bringing this service to the rural areas of South Carolina. We worked in these areas since the late 30s, and we are very familiar with what it takes to bring this type of service to individuals. This is going to be a universal service to all members in our service area. We are aware of those who may not be able to meet every situation financially and so forth, and we'll provide the lifeline service that's needed. And we have already signed up 200 members and who are interested in it, and we have, even though the process just got started, so there's a very eager here of our total service area of 18,000 members. we have the wherewithal, the history, and the knowledge of being able to meet these type of services. TricoLink is requesting that you expedite this hearing because, and I'm not going to reiterate all of the things that Mr. Black went over, but it is very critical that we get a designation of this as quickly as possible to access the funding. We have already received, received the RDOF designation. To get access to those funds, we need this expedited. The cases that have been cited and the sections that have been cited, in particularly other states like Arkansas and Mississippi, clearly show that if the PSC expedites this hearing, it will likely result in the RDOF Phase 1 funds getting to us quicker and more easily, and that would get us to be able to provide these services to the underserved areas in rural South Carolina, which I know is a concern of all of us in public service and in public life. If you could expedite that, we would appreciate it, and we would call attention to all of the fact that the RDOF funds have been provided, and that we would can get them and go to the front of the line as quickly as possible. As far as we are not a certificated utility. We filed a VOIP application. We're a community service provider. That's different from being a telephone utility. We believe that it's not required here under the Public Service Commission that we have a certificate of convenience and public necessity. And we have met all of the requirements that you have required of us. We work with ORS staff, who's been very, very good to work with, very capable. And we have entered into an agreement with them and shown them that we have the wherewithal and the ability to meet any requirements that are there to offer these services, not only to all individuals who have the wherewithal and the means, but also those low income individuals. And we will make sure they're informed about the availability and the cost of the Lifeline programs. We'll provide any kind of emergency programs that are required, and we will meet any regulatory and specific requirements that the PSC asks us to do. At this time, I just call attention to all of our filings and the testimony of our client, and we'll be glad to answer any questions you may have, but we would specifically request that you allow us to have an expedited hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney, thank you, Attorney Felder. Commissioner Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And good morning, Mr. Felder.
Good morning.
My question so much is to the applicant as maybe even to our own staff. Is it necessary in these applications for us to also grant a certificate of public convenience and necessity as part of it, or did I just miss that in reading some of the applications?
No, so we don't think it is required because we are a VOIP provision, and we have filed that form that's required. We are a communication service provider. We are not a traditional telephone utility, and we are not required, we think, under the South Carolina law that's been cited by Mr. Black previously to me, and I did not want to sound repetitious to the commission and take up your valuable time. Chapter 103 of the SC Code regulations that ETCs, don't have to have that.
Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Powers. Vice Chair Belzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Representative Felder. It's nice to see you again. It's been a while.
Howie, thank you, thank you.
Doing well. You mentioned that TricoLink is a VoIP provider, and they had, I think, filed, I don't know, did you say registration? And I was just curious, is that the form filed with ORS for
Yes, ma'am.
dual party relay and USF, the Universal Service
Yes.
Fund? Okay. That's not a federal
Yes, ma'am.
form.
No, I'm sorry if I wasn't clear on that. It's the form that's required by ORS.
No, I'm just trying to make sure that they're in a federal form of it also.
No.
Okay. Thank
No,
you very,
ma'am.
thank you very much. That's all I have.
Thank you. We'll be glad to fully comply with anything. Thank you, Ms. Belton.
Any other commissioner questions for TricoLink? All right, hearing none, we'll move to Sandhill Connections, LLC.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. My name is Robin Tuttle. I'm with Herman and Whitaker, and Carrie DeVere from our firm is also with me, representing Sandhill Connections, LLC, in their petition for ETC designation and this expedited request for action on the petition. As a bit of background, Sandhill Connections LLC is a CLEC, is a common carrier. It was authorized as a CLEC by the Commission in December 2016. It is a wholly owned subsidiary of an ILEC, Sandhill Telephone Cooperative, and Sandhill Telephone was formed in 1951 and began operating in 1955. Sandhill Connections offers service, voice and broadband in Darlington, Dillon, and Marlborough counties, and in the portions of Kershaw and Chesterfield counties that are outside of its ILEC areas, its parent ILEC areas. To briefly reiterate what's already been said before, there is a June 7th deadline to submit an ETC designation documentation to the Federal Communications Commission. That's a firm deadline, and if carriers do not meet that, they will be found in auction default and be subject to a penalty. But as in past auctions, and we've spoken with commission staff on this, the sooner carrier completes its entire application, the sooner the commission staff will act on it, the sooner they will get funding. Connections is able to file this petition because Sandhill Telephone was the participant in the auction. Because Sandhill Telephone listed Connections as a party on the original application in the auction, they were able to assign their winning bid to Connections, and Sandhill has done that by the divide winning bids deadline, which was in December. And Sandhill Connections has filed its short form, its long form applications, all timely, and the only remaining item subject to any FCC inquiry for further information is its ETC designation. I'm happy to discuss more in detail if you want regarding the application, but in a nutshell, that is our request for our expedited action on this petition.
Thank you, Attorney Tuttle. Questions for Sandhill Connections, LLC? All right. Starlink Services, LLC.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're all facing the same deadline, Mr. Chairman, the June 7th, 2021 deadline, and my colleagues have explained the need to meet that deadline adequately. We simply need the carriers, once they have won in the auction, need to both submit a long form application to the FCC, which Starlink has done, and must receive ETC designation in time as well. So as Mr. Black said, the sooner we can do this, the sooner we may be able to access funds. The public, I would like to speak to the public interest that would be served by granting this waiver. And I would recall actually a session that this commission had with Federal Communications Commissioner Clyburn in Hollywood. She came down to Hollywood and the commission joined her to hold a public hearing for the need to bring broadband service to rural areas. And I'm pleased to say that one of the areas that Starlink has been designated to serve is in the vicinity of Hollywood, South Carolina. And I've put a map on the screen to show you the census blocks that would be served by Starlink's internet service. And you can see they're in predominantly rural areas, although there are even some in places like Charleston. And the public interest for the expedited consideration was demonstrated vividly to all of us during the pandemic, when school children had to go to parking lot hotspots to get their broadband service. So I would submit that we want broadband deployed as quickly as possible, and the commission would serve the public interest by granting expedited consideration. As for the motion for the waiver of the wire center requirements, we have filed one of those as well. And the reason that is needed is the FCC's RDOF auction is done at the census block level. So we've been provided funding in Starlink's case, $6 million in South Carolina and $885 million in 35 states to serve specific census blocks, not wire centers. So it's at a much more granular level. And these census blocks, Mr. Chairman, are census blocks the FCC found to be unserved, meaning they have no internet service available to them. In Starlink's case, those are 1,061 census blocks in South Carolina, which have 4,287 locations as determined by the FCC, meaning residences or businesses that would benefit from the service. Under the terms of the RDOF auction, we must serve 40% of these locations or in 3 years and another 20% for each year thereafter. Starlink's capable of doing this through cutting edge broadband technology that's been developed by a young entrepreneur named Elon Musk, who you may have heard of. We're a subsidiary of SpaceX Corporation. In 2018, the FCC authorized Starlink to deploy 4,000 satellites in orbit to provide this broadband service. We already have 900 of them operational and beta offerings in 9 states. I would like to address the certification issue as well, Mr. Chairman. I would remind the commission that the ETC regulation we're operating under right now was promulgated by this commission in 2007. It took effect in 2008, but the commission actually implemented an emergency regulation so as to be able to provide at the time wireless service throughout South Carolina in response to a federal universal service program which would subsidize the development of wireless facilities. So we were responding to that. And if we were to look at the regulation itself, I'm going to try to share a screen again. The regulation refers to an ETC carrier as a carrier as defined in 47 USC 214E. It doesn't speak to public utilities, and there's a very good reason for this. this regulation, our ETC regulation, was adopted as part of the FCC's recommended guidelines. And wireless carriers were going to be eligible for funding under the ETC program, the federal program. So we were, by definition in South Carolina, going to grant ETC status to non-certificated carriers. It wasn't until 2009 that the Federal Communication Commission actually promulgated its first order on broadband service, ruling that it shouldn't be heavily regulated except for things like the ability, broadband VoIP should have to provide emergency services and that kind of thing, but not as to issues of rates or permission. Now, my co-counsel, Mr. Black, also mentioned that the General Assembly has seen fit to define a VoIP provider separately from a telephone utility. It did that in 589200, which refers to the access of right-of-ways and relief from obligations to serve. But as you will see, they defined communications provider as either a telephone utility, a government-owned telecommunications service, a telephone co-op, or a person or entity providing voice over IP. They didn't say a telephone utility providing voice over IP. As a matter of fact, subsection D wouldn't have even been necessary if the General Assembly considered a VoIP provider to be a telephone utility. So for those reasons, we, Starlink does not believe that a CPCN is required of an ETC applicant under the RDOF auction. And we believe that's consistent with the federal regulatory scheme as well.
All right. Attorney Tarini, are you finished with your presentation?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Any questions for Starlink Services, LLC?
Mr. Chairman,
Vice Chair Belzer?
thank you. Good morning, Mr. Tarini.
Good morning.
Your presentation raises an interesting question for me, especially with regard to your explanation of the request for waiver that the auction was done at the census level and not at the wire center level. If ETC designation is granted to, I'm just going to use your client as an example, but I reckon this is could apply to others as well. Would they only be allowed to provide the services within the wire, the census blocks that are designated in the application? I reckon my question is, would they be able to go outside of those areas to provide service elsewhere? And that is I'm particularly interested in that when you couch that with the position that your client and some of the others may not need certification as a telecommunications carrier.
Commissioner Belzer, I'm not going to speak for everybody else, but my client has applied for a defined service area, has provided a list of census blocks as that service area. If it wanted to serve additional areas of the state, and I think it will in the RDOF Phase 2 auction, I believe it would need additional designation from the commission.
Okay. So the ETC, there would be no issue for the ETC designation to only apply to those census blocks that are delineated in the application.
That's what the application defines the census area as, the service area as being.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you, Attorney Tarini. Palmetto Telephone Communications, LLC.
Thank you. Good morning. I'll try to be brief. What I'd like to do, if it pleases the commission, is take both Palmetto Telephone Communications and Ori Telephone Co-op together, because the argument is essentially the same, but I'll cover separately the facts that pertain to each of my clients, if that's suitable.
That's fine, Ms. Fox. Thank you, and please proceed.
Thank you. I think that'll help things move along a little more quickly. Everyone has covered pretty much what the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund is, and it makes federal funding available over $16 billion in phase one over a period of 10 years to wholly unserved census blocks in price cap company areas. So that is the auction. My clients, first Palmetto Telephone Communications LLC, they're a wholly owned affiliate of Palmetto Telephone Cooperative, Inc., which has been operating in South Carolina since the 1950s, like most telephone co-ops. And they created their affiliate, which has been certificated since 2001. So they've been providing services in South Carolina for a very long time as well, to provide services outside of the co-op incumbent area. Palmetto Telephone was awarded $570,000 roughly, provide service to 264 locations in 2 census block groups in Charleston County. Charleston County may sound large, but I think Mr. Turaney mentioned Hollywood, South Carolina. Palmetto Telephone's application was in the suburbs of Hollywood. So Megget, Ravenel, those kinds of areas, very, very sparsely populated area, and they will be bringing service to those locations. And it'll be 1 gig service, by the way, it's fiber. Palmetto is an ETC already in its incumbent service area, the co-op is. Palmetto Telephone has been designated as an ETC for lifeline purposes in certain areas of South Carolina, and that's the low income component of that. But this is, and that's in Walterboro, Yemassee, and St. George, South Carolina. Palmetto Telephone has been providing service for many years, as I said, in South Carolina, and they do hold a certificate to provide voice service. Ori is an incumbent, also a telephone cooperative, and has been operating since the 1950s in South Carolina, mainly in Horry County, but they have a competitive local exchange carrier, not a separate structural affiliate, but they do that as a deregulated or a differently regulated line of business, and they're in Georgetown, Marion, I believe Dillon County. They were awarded RDOF funding in Georgetown County and Marion County, a number of census blocks there. And they too will be providing 1 gig service to those unserved census blocks that lack access to broadband right now. And they will be receiving about $730,000 over 10 years to do that. They are an ETC, and they're designated in their incumbent area. They've previously been designated as an ETC for purposes of the CAF2 auction, which someone mentioned earlier. They do have some CAF2 funded areas in Georgetown and Marion counties, and they were designated in those census blocks previously. Again, they have a certificate of public convenience and necessity from this commission to provide voice services in the areas for which they're seeking designation. So the applications demonstrate, and those applications were verified and filed with verified testimony to testify to the fact that Palmetto and Ori both meet all of the federal requirements to be designated as ETCs in the funded areas. They also meet all of the state requirements with some exceptions. We are seeking a waiver of the requirement. PSC Regulation 103-690C provides the state requirements for an initial designation as an ETC, and one of those requirements, it's in C1B, is to file a 2-year plan setting forth how you'll improve service, etc. The FCC has a corresponding similar requirement, and it's to file a 5-year plan, but the FCC has waived that for purposes of the RDOF fund because there are such granular reporting requirements there, For example, companies have to build to 40% of the locations in the application by the end of year 3, and then 20% per year after that, so that they'll be fully built out by year 6. And they have reporting requirements at the FCC, very granular by geocoded locations, et cetera, to show where what progress they're making on that construction. And the FCC determined that that was going to be way better than a 5-year plan, because it will be actual progress along the way. And so that's why we're seeking a waiver of that requirement, as well as the requirement to annually update the 2-year plan, because there will be much greater granularity and reporting at the FCC level. And we have reached a stipulation with ORS where we will make that information available to the Commission and ORS, so that y'all can check on our progress as well. The other waiver we requested has been discussed by several people, as the requirement that to the extent the Commission is prohibited from designating an area smaller than a wire center, we would request a waiver of that, for the same reason, because the FCC has targeted the federal funding to census blocks that are wholly unserved, which there's no service at all in that census block at the 25.3 level of broadband speed. So we would request that waiver as well. This has been covered, but I'll just cover it briefly. Expedited review is appropriate. The deadline for intervention in these dockets has passed. Palmetto's deadline was February 24th. Ori's was February 25th. No one intervened, filed comments, expressed an interest in these dockets. ORS is a statutory party to these proceedings, and we have worked out, as I said, a stipulation with ORS. I believe ORS obviously can speak for themselves, but I believe they are in support of our applications. And all interested parties, therefore, have been afforded an opportunity for a hearing as due process might require. And so we filed, as I said, verified applications and verified testimony. Many others have mentioned this deadline of June 7th that the FCC has established for carriers to have their designation and documentation of their designation as ETCs, so that they can receive the funding. And so time is of the essence. Again, I think the public interest is met by granting these waivers and granting expedited review and approving these applications. It will bring federal funds into the state to assist my clients with building out high-speed broadband to currently unserved areas, and will benefit people who live and work in those areas. And as we've seen in the last year, it's been a year, it's crazy, that is critically important today with e-learning, working from home, these virtual meetings. Broadband is critical to everything that we do, and getting it to these unserved areas like Megget is very, very important. My clients are, as I've said, well-established broadband and voice providers for many, many decades in South Carolina, with a long history of service and commitment to serving rural areas in particular in South Carolina. They hold certificates of public convenience and necessity to provide the voice component of the service that they've committed to provide in the funded areas. And I think, so yeah, Ori in particular has been providing service as a competitive local exchange carrier in South Carolina since 1998, and Palmetto since 2001. And as I said, both of their cooperatives have been around since the 1950s, so a long history there. I think that is all I have. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Attorney Fox. Questions for Ms. Fox, or excuse me, Attorney Fox? Vice Chair Belzer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Ms. Fox.
Good morning, Commissioner Belzer.
One thing that I've been thinking about, and your presentation reminded me, could more than one provider be approved in the auction by the FCC to serve in the same wire center, or are these going to be exclusive to whoever wins that auction?
It's exclusive as to the census block group level.
Okay.
The wire center just wasn't a consideration in the RDOF process.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I meant under the census block. So, your client and Mr. Torini's client wouldn't be approved for the same census, block, is that correct?
That's correct. There was something called the random assignment rule, where if there was a tie during the RDOF auction, they randomly assigned a winner based on the two entities that tied.
So basically, for some of these folks in these rural areas to have access to broadband, they need for these applications to be approved so that these carriers or these providers can provide the service, broadband service in these census blocks. Census block, yeah. Is that correct?
Well, there's nothing to stop anyone from going there, but obviously these areas are very sparsely populated, and as time has shown, it takes a little bit of an incentive, a help with the cost, in order to provide an incentive for providers to do that. So I would say you're probably right that it would certainly be a much longer time before someone could get to some of those remote areas in the absence of funding.
And probably the better way to say that is, thus far, the economics of those sparsely populated areas, those rural areas, the economics have not been there for a provider to already go into those areas. Would that be a fair assessment?
That's absolutely correct.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's all I have, Mr.
All right. Anything else for Ms. Fox?
Chair Williams, I have a general question. Perhaps Ms. Fox could answer it.
Commissioner Caston.
Listening to Vice Chair Belcher's question, the service areas would be defined census blocks, as I understand it, which would be listed in the application, correct?
That's correct.
And I also understand that since these are rural areas, it's probably not been economically feasible or made sense for other private, I guess, utilities or investors to run broadband, correct? Or to provide broadband service?
That's generally correct, yes. I would note that these are price cap company areas, so they're the larger company areas to begin with. But if you think about an AT&T or a CenturyLink Frontier, they have a lot of service territory that is very rural, and so yes, those incumbents or other competitive providers that might come in, there's really not an economic business case to serve some of those remote and rural areas.
And if these service areas are granted to Palmetto, Ori, and the others, are those protected service areas, or could in the future competition still offer service in those areas?
Well, first, Palmetto and Ori already have authority to provide service as competitive local exchange carriers in those service areas. So it's not necessarily being granted a service area, but it's being designated as an eligible telecommunications carrier in that service area. And that means they're undertaking an obligation to serve all locations within that area that they can reasonably serve. But to get to your question, I think the answer is no, there's no exclusive protection there. The market itself is access somewhat of a protection because no one has seen fit to build there yet. Because in Palmetto's case, I think it's something like less than 4.5 locations per census block. We're talking about very sparsely populated areas, so that provides a disincentive for carriers to come in and compete there as well.
But since
there's nothing to stop them from doing that.
Okay. And I assume since you reasonably have the infrastructure in place to provide the current services you're providing, it would, I guess, assist or help you with this service also, correct?
Yes, I think, the carriers that are incumbent carriers generally are looking for things that are close by to where they already have facilities. It certainly is a new build, and it certainly, I would point out too that the carriers are having to fund a lot of this construction out of pocket. The funding that was made available is not a significant percentage of what the cost is going to be to serve to these areas, which again goes to the public interest of granting these applications. But it is, my companies can somewhat leverage the facilities that they have to expand beyond facilities that are already in place.
Makes sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Attorney Fox? Representing
Mr. Chairman.
Palmetto Telephone Communications and Ori Telephone Cooperative. Yes, sir. Commissioner Irvin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Fox, to the extent that the FCC regulations are inconsistent with any state statute or regulations, would you agree that the federal regs would take precedence due to preemption?
Well, I think the state can take additional regulations on that if they choose, as long as they don't conflict. I mean, I haven't done my research on federal preemption lately, but the state regulations were intended initially to mirror and track the federal regulations. And what happened was the federal regulations changed. So the state, and they've changed in a number of different ways, but the state regulations are a little bit outdated. We'll be looking at those in May, I believe, in a workshop. And they were originally intended to track the federal regulations. And so, to the extent, I think the FCC's regulations are more up to date and make more sense. And if there is a conflict, I would think their preemption would probably come into play.
That would be further legal support for waiver in these cases. Would you agree?
Yes, sir. I believe so.
Thank you.
All right. Aiken Electric Cooperative Incorporated.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Frank Ellerby for Aiken Electric Cooperative. And I will, we're in the same position as the other folks to a greater or lesser extent who have made arguments. I'll try not to repeat. Aiken Electric Cooperative is also an electric co-op that's been around for a long time in South Carolina since the 30s or 40s. Aiken, over the last few years, has determined that it wanted to help bring broadband to the rural areas where it provides electric service, and it decided, made a decision to do that. They filed an RDOF petition. They were not very successful in their petition with the FCC. They were awarded one census block. There are a potential of 34 customers, not 3,400 or 34,000, but 34 locations in that census block for which that are presently unserved, and the funding they got, which is $45,000 over 10 years, will assist them in providing service in that to those unserved customers in that census block. It may occur to you, well, why, with that result, why would you pursue the ETC designation in that one census block? And the reason is that one of the potential things that can happen if you're awarded funding through an FCC auction and you default, you don't carry through, there's a possibility. I'm told that it would be unlikely in this situation, but Aiken made the decision that they did not want to default, and that and that Aiken would apply for ETC designation. During the same time period, Aiken negotiated with CarolinaConnect, Mr. Black's client. CarolinaConnect is a cooperative, and it is the present members of, or the founding members of CarolinaConnect were Mid-Carolina Electric Cooperative and Newberry Electric Cooperative. Aiken is in the process of joining CarolinaConnect, and the business plan will be that CarolinaConnect will be doing the retail, providing the retail services. So, and we've explained this in the testimony that we filed in support of our application, that Aiken and CarolinaConnect have reached an agreement. Aiken is going to be a member of CarolinaConnect. CarolinaConnect will take over the retail provision service. CarolinaConnect has excellent telecommunications voice experience. Its leadership and some of its key employees have long experience in providing voice services in South Carolina. We are confident that with the assistance of CarolinaConnect, that all obligations, all ETC applications for our one ETC service area, which is the census block. We also need a waiver from the commission of the requirement, the wires, not less than a wire center requirement. We need a waiver of that. In addition, we have discussed that with ORS. That is covered in the stipulation that we have negotiated with ORS. I will file a motion asking for a waiver just so that we're that was not included in my application when I hurriedly filed it right before the deadline. We believe that you will also be very interested to see the stipulation. We've executed the stipulation with ORS on Friday. To the extent the commission has concerns about oversight of eligible telecommunications carriers, you will be interested in the various obligations that my client, I haven't seen the other stipulations, but my client agreed to considerable oversight and to meet various common carrier type obligations. They're spelled out in that stipulation. It's my understanding that stipulation will be filed by ORS soon, and y'all will have the benefit of being able to review that. I think that will also support the fact that the stipulation has those requirements, will also support the various requests for waiver that have been made by my client and others. I'll speak very briefly to public interest. This is something that the commission can do by approving this designation, which falls under the voice regulation, but it's something y'all can do that is going to help broadband be pushed out into rural areas of South Carolina. Y'all should know that with respect to the electric co-ops in particular, the General Assembly acted last year in September of 2020, adopted Act 175, that expressly allowed and encouraged electric cooperatives to either directly or indirectly provide broadband service in their service areas. A recognition by the General Assembly that one way of addressing broadband in rural areas was to have electric co-ops get involved. Some of our colleagues, my colleagues that are appearing here had concerns about whether that could be done in a way that would threaten competition, and the bill, Act 175 of 2020, addresses those concerns. But it shows fundamentally a really strong interest in South Carolina General Assembly in encouraging electric cooperatives to use their facilities, their knowledge of rural areas to help get broadband implemented, rolled out, extended, and made available in rural areas. So we think there's a overwhelming argument that the public interest would be served by these RDOF applications being successfully completed and finalized, and that this commission should support that by approving these applications so that we can move forward with the funding and maybe additional rounds of funding that will be available, we hope, in the coming couple of years. So with that, I'm happy to try to answer any questions that you have.
Questions for Aiken Electric Co-op? All right, thank you, Mr. Ellerby. We're going to move on to Charter FiberLink and Time Warner Cable.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Again, my name is Mitchell Willoughby, and I represent CharterLink and Time Warner. Joining me this morning is Andrew D'Antoni, a lawyer with our firm, and also Ben Brazil, who works directly with Charter. And so we have a slide presentation, Mr. Chairman, that addresses all of the issues that we need to demonstrate to the commission to justify the expedited treatment that we have requested in this case, dealing both with Charter's capabilities and also the public interest argument. I'm going to ask Mr. D'Antoni to share his screen, and let's put up the cover slide. And if you would, Andrew, go to the second slide. So this is, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, this is an outline of the presentation. First, we're going to talk about Charter's capabilities and qualifications and their current impact in South Carolina. Very important things to establish our ability, if you will, to be able to do what we've committed to do through the RDOF program. You've heard a good bit this morning about RDOF, so I may truncate this a little bit, but we have a slide about the RDOF program. But I will talk specifically about the significant award that Charter received for South Carolina and the transformational role that we'll play in bringing broadband to rural and insular communities throughout the state.
Attorney Willoughby?
Yes.
Could you come closer to your microphone? We're having some trouble hearing you in the hearing room.
Okay, how about now? Is this better?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Okay, perfect. So, and then we'll talk about Charter's RDOF award. Then we'll have a checklist where we demonstrate that Charter meets all of the ETC requirements, and then we'll summarize. Next, please. So what is Charter? Charter is a company with over $100 billion market capitalization, a 96,100 employees as of the end of 2020, 48.1 billion annual revenues in 2020, and over 750,000 miles of network infrastructure and 31 million customer relations across 41 states. Charter possesses the capabilities, the competence, and capital to deliver on its RDOF commitments. Recently, Charter announced an expected investment of approximately $5 billion, offset by $1.2 billion in Rural Digital Opportunity Fund support to expand Charter's network to what the FCC estimates to be more than 1 million homes and small businesses in lower density, mostly rural communities across 24 states that do not have access to broadband services of at least 25 or 3 megabits per second. This new initiative is in addition to Charter's existing network expansion plans, including numerous state broadband grant projects as well as the company's previously planned privately funded expansions. The network Charter will build in these rural areas will offer 1 gigabit per second high-speed broadband access to all newly served customer locations with starting speeds of 200 megabits per second, enabling customers to engage in remote learning, work, telemedicine, and other applications that require high bandwidth, low latency connectivity. Given the depth of Charter's resources, capabilities, experience, and nationwide service platform, it is clear that Charter meets South Carolina's eligible telecommunications carrier ETC requirements. Next slide. So this slide talks about Charter's economic impact on South Carolina. That impact is significant in many positive ways. For example, Charter employs 3,254 South Carolinians to assist in delivering high-quality broadband services to 914,000 customers in the state. Charter is committed to raising its minimum starting wage to $20 an hour for all employees in 2022. Virtually all current and newly hired salaried and hourly employees in 2021 will earn at least $18 an hour plus company paid benefits. Charter is currently hiring for nearly 3,000 positions across its 41 state service area that feature the $18 starting wage. Charter's also contributed $108 million in state taxes for fiscal year 2020, while making $214 million in capital investments in its South Carolina-based infrastructure. So you can see that our commitment to the state today is already significant. Next. You've heard, well, this slide's an overview of the RDOF program. I'm going to truncate some of the information because you've heard some of it, but I want to highlight a number of things. The RDOF is a program, of course, initiated by the FCC. I think it was mentioned before, the program is broken into 2 phases. Phase 1 was designed to allocate up to $16 billion to census blocks completely unserved by upload speeds of 25 megabits per second and download of 3 megabits per second broadband services. Ultimately, Phase 1 allocated $9.23 billion to cover over 5 million unserved locations in 49 states and 1 territory. Phase 2 proposes to allocate unused sums remaining from Phase 1. And of course, we in South Carolina want to make sure that our Phase 1 funds are fully utilized to the maximum extent possible, plus an additional $4.4 billion to build out broadband to partially serve census blocks. The FCC awards RDOF support funds based upon a reverse auction model, which basically means that bidders compete against each other to offer the FCC the best balance of price and technology to build out broadband to unserved areas. And while you're competing against other entities, you're also competing internally from state to state. So there's competition for these funds, as the Commission may imagine, from many different sources. The FCC, and this is important, Commissioners, you've gotten some of this information, but let me highlight this. The FCC requires RDOF support recipients to meet certain build-out milestones. Specifically, FCC regulations require that RDOF Support recipients must complete deployment to 40% of awarded locations within 3 years after receipt of support, and that's important, after receipt of support, to 60% by the end of the 4th year, and to 80% by the end of the 5th year. The FCC will publish updated location counts not later than the end of the 6th year of support. Because of this, a support recipient's final milestones will depend on whether or not the FCC determines that there are more or fewer locations required to be served. Generally, if there are more locations, the recipient must deploy to 100% of previously awarded locations by the end of year 6 and 100% of new locations by the end of year 8. If there are fewer locations, the recipients must deploy to 100% of locations by the end of year 6. Disbursements of RDOF funding will be made after the winning bidder submits a long-form application, obtains necessary eligible telecommunications carrier designation, which is what brings us before you today, and is authorized by the FCC to receive support. The FCC does not provide a specific date when it will advise winning bidders that they are authorized to receive support. Additionally, an RDOF awardee must be deemed an eligible telecommunications carrier to be authorized to receive the support, and Section 214E2 of the Federal Communications Act gives state commissions the primary responsibility for ETC designations. And we've talked a little bit about your regulations. The regulations that you have now for ETC designation track federal regulations at the time that they were issued. Charlie spoke about that. Those regulations are not necessarily in sync with all of the requirements of RDOF, which is admittedly a very, very new program. Next slide. Now let's talk about charters specific awards for the great state of South Carolina. On December 7 of 2020, when the FCC released the results of the RDOF Phase 1 auction, Charter had been designated as the winning bidder for over $112 million in RDOF support for nearly 12,000 census blocks. This award is remarkable and will be transformative for the state and its citizens. RDOF funds, and this is important as well, members of the commission, are in addition to the expected infusion by charter of $250 million in private capital. As you've heard others say, the RDOF funds are insufficient in and of themselves to deploy the assets and the infrastructure to these communities, many of which are without service today, and the density of population is such that it makes it very difficult to justify economically. But totally, that's $362 million projected to be invested in the state's broadband infrastructure, providing to South Carolina and its citizens a once-in-a-generation opportunity to significantly narrow the digital divide. Notably, of the 24 states where Charter was awarded RDOF support funds, South Carolina places 5th in terms of total support awarded and 2nd in terms of support funds awarded on a per capita basis. Very, very significant impact for our great state. Moreover, as you can see on the small map that we have on this slide, Charter RDF support funds are directed at some of the most rural counties in South Carolina. And while there are many counties that obviously are very deserving and need support. For these rural counties in particular, this broadband infrastructure will be transformational. I want to mention 4. Allendale, today there's more than 2/3, 69% of Allendale County's nearly 9,000 residents cannot access high-speed broadband. As a result of Charter's investment in South Carolina, an additional FCC estimated 2,318 Allendale County homes and small businesses will have access to gigabit connections from Spectrum Internet. But do keep in mind, as Frank pointed out in his presentation, you're talking about a significant amount of investment to bring online 2,318 homes and businesses. Bamberg County. Today, 60% of Bamberg County's more than 14,000 residents cannot access high-speed broadband. As a result of Charter's investment in South Carolina, an additional FCC estimated 2,853 Bamberg County homes and small businesses will have access to gigabit connections. Barnwell County, about 47% of Barnwell County's nearly 21,000 residents cannot access high-speed broadband today. As a result of RDOF funding and Charter's investment, an additional FCC estimated 3,592 Barnwell County homes and small businesses will have access to gigabit connections. And finally, of the 4 I wanted to mention, Hampton County, today about half, 8,823 of Hampton County's more than 19,000 residents cannot access high-speed broadband. As a result of this funding and this initiative, an additional FCC estimated 3,129 Hampton County homes and small businesses will have access to gigabit connections. Truly transformational. Next slide. Our state's leadership, the governor, a chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, a Speaker of the House, all have spoken very favorably and uniformly support Charter's effort to bridge the digital divide in South Carolina, and notes that its efforts advances the state's policy of encouraging the deployment of broadband infrastructure to unserved areas, especially those rural areas that have inadequate or no service today. Next, please. And so here's our checklist. Charter satisfies all South Carolina ETC requirements. I won't review those specifically. They're on the slide there for your review. I would say this, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission, that through the application itself and the testimony of Mr. Chewanick, who is Vice President, State Government Affairs at Charter, the charter entity satisfies all of the requirements that the commission has under its rules and regulations. I would also note to Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, that we have asked for 3 waivers, which mimic the waivers that others have requested. First, the 2-year plan. I think Peg Fox mentioned this, that the RDOF program itself has a very rigid timetable and planning mechanism, and we're asking that we be able to use that planning mechanism as opposed to the 2-year plan, and that 2-year requirement be waived. We've also asked to waive the equal access to long distance requirement That requirement is no longer an FCC requirement. We cover that in both the application and Mr. Chwanik's testimony. And finally, you've heard already about the waiver requests that others have made, that the commission, your regulation says the commission shall not designate a service area to an ETC that is smaller than an entire wire center. The census blocks in many cases will be smaller than a wire center, and as a consequence, the census blocks are what will be controlling the funding, and the funding is designated based upon those census blocks. But with those waivers, we believe, Mr. Chairman, that charter meets and satisfies all of the requirements that this commission has, and therefore our application is ready to be approved on a expedited basis. And as Ms. Fox indicated, I believe all due process requirements have been met. All the public notice has been given, and no third parties have intervened in these proceedings. Of course, ORS is a party, as a statutory party, and we have been in consultation with ORS. And finally, the final slide, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, just a summary. A total of $362 million. And of course, we want to, you've heard the deadline of June 7. All of us are interested in being able to receive the ETC designation. It is a prerequisite. We must be able to demonstrate to the FCC. The funds are competitively offered. Everyone is interested in these funding sources to be able to bring broadband to rural communities. We certainly want the funds available for use in South Carolina and not in neighboring states. We mentioned that there are 98,670 unserved locations in nearly 12,000 census blocks in 41 counties across South Carolina, which Charter is looking to bring service to those areas with the approval of this application and the award of the RDOF funds, and of course the receipt of those RDOF funds. The joint application and the pre-filed testimony, Mr. Chwanik, demonstrate that we meet all of the ETC requirement. Charter possesses the competence, capital, and resources to follow through on its RDOF commitments and obligations. We believe that granting the ET designation to Charter strongly advances the public interest that this state has expressed as its policy for narrowing the digital divide. And we believe the written record before the commission in Charter's docket clearly indicates that we meet all of the requirements that you have for ETC designation. And with that, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, I stand ready to answer any questions that you may have.
Questions for Charter FiberLink, Time Warner Cable?
Chairman Williams, this is Commissioner Williams.
Commissioner Williams, you have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you. Attorney Willoughby, I think I noted in your application that you all were looking for the ETC to be designated by April 15th. Could you speak to that request, please?
Yes, ma'am. The reason for that request is the last thing you want to be doing is receiving designation on June 6th. And so what we were trying to do is express to the commission our belief that we wanted to make sure that we had action from the commission by that date. Obviously, then we've got reporting requirements to make. And so is that a firm date drilled into the sand? No, ma'am, it's not. But it's certainly a date that we would hope the commission would act on our application provide us with an order so that we can do the reporting that is necessary to the FCC. As I mentioned in the presentation, 91% of the census blocks designated for RDOF funding in South Carolina were awarded to charter. So we will be a major contributor to this state, to the rural population of this state, in bringing broadband, closing that digital divide. So we are saying we don't want anything to stand in the way of getting those funds to flow, and without any question, until those funds flow, action it will be difficult to make action. As you've heard from some of the others, these areas have been there. They didn't just arise yesterday. They've been there for years, and the reason they don't have service today is the cost of providing service to them is prohibitive. And so with the government funding, that aids that process to go forward. And that's what we're saying is it truly has the ability to be transformational, and we want the commission to be willing to support our designation as ETC carrier so we can move forward in that process. I can't, you're on mute, I believe.
I am. I've been trained well to turn it off. Thank you so much. Appreciate that answer. That brings to mind another question, and this is more of a curiosity kind of question. Is there anything in the regulations with and agreements with for the RDOF funds in terms of the cost that will be provided, that the service costs that you will pass on to the customer, that Charter and everyone will pass on to the customer? Is it going to be standard rates, or is it going to be something different with the infusion of federal funds?
I may ask Ben, are you in a position to specifically answer that question? I would say, Commissioner, that under your regulations, there's certain information that we provide to all of we make clear, we provide notice what the rates and charges will be. So certainly that information will be available. If that is essentially your question, then that certainly is the answer. One of the checklist items that you have is, and we actually gave an affidavit to this effect, that we will provide through public notice methods what those rates will be.
Not specifically, Commissioner, but generally, obviously, I know where you're going, and the next concern after we construct these areas is affordability. That's really when you get out into these areas and you see these areas with low density. First of all, they have to have a computer, and that's a challenge in and of itself. And secondly, they have to have an affordable product. We today offer Spectrum Internet Assist, which is a 30 megabit downstream product for $17.99 for all free and reduced lunch children. And most of these counties, that's 100% of the school district, and for senior citizens as well on supplemental Social Security. So, but I believe, and I'm not, I would have to get back to you, but I believe that the RDOF is also requiring some type of special additional broadband packages under the RDOF program. But I'm not convinced of that, but we do have an affordable product today.
Thank you. You got to the spirit of my question, and appreciate the answer.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Chairman Williams. No more questions.
Chairman Williams.
Commissioner Caston.
Good morning, Mr. Willoughby.
Good morning, Commissioner.
The map was small, and I was trying to look at the areas, the unserved areas. I think the light green was the unserved areas. Are they totally unserved, or is in some cases poorly served, or
Commissioner Caslin, in many instances it's totally unserved, but in some instances it's the service is certainly inadequate. But attached to our application is very granular information. We have all 11,900 and some census blocks listed, and to be able to, you can drill down into each one of those to determine where they are. But that's a significant amount of the area in the state of South Carolina.
So in essence, those areas would require total infrastructure, which I'm not sure exactly what that is. I don't know if that's just a fiber optic line that you bury or what's involved, but is that in essence what will be required?
Well, it will certainly require the fiber optic line that you mentioned, and that's a very good point. That's the state-of-the-art technology today, is the deployment of fiber optics. But there's a lot involved, as you would know, Commissioner, in terms of building out that infrastructure. It's costly, it's expensive. Access and rights of way will be issues that will bear on that cost. All of those things are important. Electronics to make that glass wire or glass, that strand of glass, not a wire, but a strand of glass, be able to communicate. The electronics are very expensive as well. But all of those things are important. But think about it. Think about if we're able to construct, so you've got in these rural communities, the capability of 1 gigabyte per second in terms of capacity. We'll have young folks in Bamberg County that will be able to communicate with the same speed that their counterparts can in New York City or in Columbia or Charleston, living downtown. So it truly is an effort, and government is, of course, placed significant amount of public policy interest behind making these facilities available so that the digital divide can be bridged.
The 98,670 unserved that you had on that slide, was that like a snapshot of now that there are literally 98,670 potential clients or customers?
Those are the locations within those 11,900 census blocks that have been identified by the FCC as currently unserved. So did I get that right, Ben? Those 98,000 are locations.
That's right. They're actual structures, locations, Commissioner. And to answer your earlier question about totally unserved, yes, Mitch mentioned that they're somewhat underserved, but by definition of 25 megabits down and 3 megabits up, all of these census blocks in this round of RDOF are designated as completely unserved, i.e. the most difficult census blocks to serve.
All right, I tend to just mess with numbers anyway. So if the 98,670 are unserved or would be potential customers, and $362 million total. If I did the math right, that's about $3,670 per account, and with the private investment, only $250 million, excluding the federal money. That's about $2,534 per account. Does that sound about right? Does that make sense?
Making general walking around sense based on industry estimates on per location construction, but I didn't do that same math. But yes, sir, it doesn't sound unusual.
And Commissioner, I might say that putting the word "only" in front of $250 million does not do $250 million justice, but the two of them combined at $362 million, your math is right as to on a customer count basis. And I gather from your past experience that you've done those calculations before.
Time or two. I was trying to look at, never mind. Good job. Thank you very much. And make that map bigger next time.
We will. It's hard. The virtual world, as it does have its limitations.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman.
Vice Chair Belzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Willoughby. How are you today?
Good morning, Commissioner.
Mr. Willoughby, I believe you stated that that your client is seeking 3 waivers, and I believe that's a waiver of the requirement to file the 2-year plan, a waiver that service be on by wire center basis because we've been hearing about the census block that's been approved under this federal program. And then I think the third one had to do with equal access for toll calls. Is that correct?
Correct.
And would you explain that one a little bit? I don't think we've heard about that requested waiver this morning.
It is your regulation, your regulation 103.690, subsection C5. And what it says is certified by affidavit signed by an officer of the company that the carrier acknowledges that the Federal Communications Commission may require it to provide equal access to long-distance carriers in the event that no other eligible telecommunications carriers provide any equal access within the service area. And that is not a requirement by the FCC any longer. That may have been a requirement and more limited to the wireline carriers back in 2007 and 2008, Commissioner, when this regulation was enacted, but that requirement no longer exists.
Thank you. I just wanted to have something, an explanation on the record today, and I appreciate you doing that. Mr. Willoughby, would you mind providing the court reporter with a copy of your PowerPoint so we can include that with the record today?
We will be happy to do so. We'll email it to the court reporter as soon as this proceedings ended.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have for Mr. Willoughby, but I do have a kind of question for all of the applicants.
Please proceed.
I would like to ask all of the applicants, we've had several specifically address these requests for waiver, and I would just like to know from everyone, there have been 3 requested waivers identified. Would those be applicable to everybody or just the people that have specifically requested them? If y'all wouldn't mind letting us know, that might be helpful. Or letting me know, it'd be helpful to me. I can't speak for anybody else.
Mr. Chairman.
Let me do this. Let me go down before we get to that, Vice Chair Belzer, let me see if there's any more questions for Charter or Time Warner.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Thomas, go right ahead, sir.
Thank you. And Mr. Willoughby, this is not really necessarily directed to you, but you're the person on the stand right now, I suppose. So after all of this goes through, assuming that everything goes according to plan, will there still be areas of South Carolina that are unserved?
Mr. Commissioner, there would probably be areas that still may be unserved, but this will be so transformational in terms of getting areas or getting infrastructure into so many census blocks, so many rural census blocks throughout the state, that you'll have so much infrastructure in place, the ability to extend that infrastructure will be easier to do than it certainly is today.
Okay, thank you. And just generally, I guess a comment for everyone or a question. If there's anything that this commission can do that will help make things move more smoothly and more quickly or cover more areas, I would appreciate any input on that. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. Now to Vice Chair Belzer's question about the waiver, just so we won't have everyone speaking at the same time. I'm just going to go down the list. CarolinaConnect, Cooperative Incorporated.
Thank you. We move for the motion for waiver of Reg 103-690. I think Mr. Willoughby also talked about the need. Mr. Irvin asked that question also of the issue of where federal regs potentially conflict with the PSC regs. I think that was laid out well. It's that we have a situation here where the area that we're serving is smaller, and so we need to make sure that we have that waiver because it's smaller than an entire wire center.
Okay.
But is that Mr. Black?
It is.
Mr. Black, I read your motion to just be one part, and now there have been 3 parts of the regulation that have been identified, and my question is, are you asking for waiver of the same 3 sections that were mentioned by Mr. Willoughby?
On Mr. Willoughby's, I would need to speak to CarolinaConnect as to the issue of the long distance issue. I don't know that that's something that affects us the same way.
All right.
And I'm uncertain on what the other waiver was. What was the third?
Well, in your motion, it was the commission shall not designate a service area that is smaller than the wire center. So that had to do with the census block. But there was also the requested waiver of the 2-year plan because of the reporting under the RDOC process. Is my understanding is going to be quite or cover that. I think the feds use a 5-year plan now, but then the RDOC, and I don't know if you've had a stipulation with ORS and whether that addresses reporting or not.
We do have draft stipulations, and I'm uncertain if that's something that what their position on that, or if they're covering that.
Okay, I didn't mean for this to be so involved. I really was just kind of like thinking, well, maybe everybody needs to be out of the same spoon, but if that's not possible, I can withdraw my request, but we can see what anybody else says.
All right, Trico Link Incorporated.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. This is John Felder. We'll consult on that and get back with if you can. I think what we have covered, maybe some of the things that they are asking for don't apply to us.
Okay, sounds good, sir. Sandhill Connections, LLC.
This is Robin Tuttle for Sandhill Connections, and Sandhill asked for a waiver of the South Carolina rule that deals with the 2-year plan and with the prohibition on designation of ETC designation for areas smaller than a wire center. And we agree with the positions and reasoning that's been put forth, particularly by Peg Fox on that. Those are items, those 2 items are ones that I would expect probably most carriers would need, but I'll just speak for Connections that they would need that. I would have to look into the equal access. I don't know that that's an issue for Connections. And Connections has also entered into a draft stipulation with ORS. We're expecting to finalize that.
Thank you, ma'am. Starlink Services, LLC.
Mr. Chairman, we filed a motion for a waiver of the wire service requirement, and for the reasons already explained. In our application, we also requested a waiver of the 2-year plan requirement. And the equal access rule, as I think Mr. Wilby noted, says the FCC may require equal access, the carrier to provide equal access. That's no longer FCC policy. We don't think it's applicable to VoIP. We didn't explicitly ask for that waiver since the FCC is not requiring it. I also wanted to take this opportunity very briefly to clear up an answer I had to Commissioner Belser, because I fear I may have misstated our position. Commissioner Belser asked if we were seeking, and I don't remember exactly how it was said, which is why I want to clear it up. I want to be clear, Starlink is seeking designation for the census blocks that are appended to the application, but it is not seeking it's not limiting its authority to serve to those census blocks. We think Starlink could serve anywhere in the state. It's just that these are the blocks we need the ETC designation for.
That's fine.
All right. Palmetto Telephone Communications, Ori Telephone Cooperative.
Yes, we likewise requested a waiver of the 2-year plan requirement and the requirement or the prohibition on designating an area smaller than a wire center. We did not request a waiver of the equal access requirement because it does say that the carrier acknowledges that the FCC may require it to provide equal access. And we do acknowledge they may do that. They used to do that. They don't do it now. Maybe they'll do it in the future. And we did not think it was necessary to have a waiver of that requirement.
Thank you, ma'am. Aiken?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I indicated, we do request a waiver of the less than wire center area since we only have one census block. We don't think we need the waiver of the equal access requirement for exactly the same reasons that Ms. Fox just explained. With respect to the 2-year reporting, since we have one census block, we were willing to, since that's our service area, we can comply with the existing regulation. That is covered in Aiken's stipulation with ORS, and I would defer to ORS on that issue. I think it's important from the commission to hear from ORS on that. I know that ORS is under a lot of pressure regarding mapping of broadband from the South Carolina General Assembly. There's a lot of interest in our political leadership in South Carolina, understanding where broadband is presently served and where it's going so that state dollars can be directed most appropriately to get to unserved areas. And I think ORS has been taking the lead on that and dealing with the General Assembly. So I defer to them on what they would like for this commission to do with regard to that issue. Thank you. Nothing further.
All right, thank you, sir. I believe Charter and Time Warner have accurately or fully put their position on the record regarding the waiver. We have one party left. That's the Office of Regulatory Staff. We've been going about 2 hours. Let's come back. Let's take a brief recess and come back on the record at 12:10. ladies and gentlemen, we're back in docket numbers 2021-15C through 2021-23C. Let's take roll. In the hearing room, we have Commissioner Powers, Commissioner Caston, Vice Chair Belzer, Chairman Williams, and joining us virtually, we have Commissioners Thomas, Urban, and Williams. Before we broke for a quick recess, I wanted to address a question raised by Commissioner Thomas regarding what, if anything, the commission could do to make this process easier. I wanted to give the parties opportunity to answer that question if they had a answer. We can start with CarolinaConnect Cooperative.
Thank you. In terms of making it easier, I think that this process being virtual is working well, but the actual application, we just asked that it be granted in an expedited manner, which would allow us to move forward with service faster. Otherwise, we'll be behind other states.
Thank you, sir. Trico Link Incorporated.
Yes, sir. Commissioner and members of the commission, I agree with Mr. Black. That's what we agree with, just to expedite the hearings and let us move forward with these services. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sandhill Connections.
This is Robin Tuttle for Sandhill Connections, and we would again request that you expedite the action on this petition. And I believe there have been no intervening parties other than ORS, and we expect to reach a stipulation agreement with ORS. So we would request that no further hearings be conducted, and that we would file an appropriate motion.
Thank you, ma'am. Sterling Services.
Similarly, Mr. Chairman, we would ask respectfully that the commission waive the scheduled hearing in this matter. And we expect to be filing a stipulation as well and have provided verified testimony.
Thank you, sir. Palmetto Telephone Communication, Ori Telephone Cooperative.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we concur with what others have said, that we appreciate the opportunity to have this virtual hearing to explain the applications and the request for waiver, and I think that's been very helpful. So we would just request expedited review. I think Robin, Ms. Tuttle mentioned filing a motion. I don't believe that should be required. I think most of us requested expedited review and made that motion within the application itself. And I think that this hearing to be heard on those motions should suffice without the need to file anything additional written in this docket. And we would just ask that you expedite and grant the applications as soon as possible. And I think it was Mitch that said that, yes, we've got that June 7th deadline, but the sooner the better to allow us time to, complete the long form application process and be approved for funding as soon as possible.
Thank you, ma'am. Aiken Electric Cooperative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with what the others have said with respect to our application. This has been an excellent opportunity for us to talk to y'all and explain what's going on. It makes it a whole lot easier to waive a hearing. I don't want to speak for ORS. I think they should be given a chance to weigh in on where they are with all parties. But certainly for my client, we think you can move forward, and we would appreciate doing that as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Charter FiberLink, Time Warner Cable.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of the charter entities, we likewise request that you waive the hearing. We've included that in our prayer in the application, so we don't think another motion is required. We will be filing later today a verification for Mr. Chwanik's testimony. So you have sworn testimony before you. You have a policy in the past where there's no intervention and no opposition. where you can grant applications based upon the written testimony where it's verified. All due process requirements will have completely be complied with. So we're going to file the verification for Mr. Chwanik's testimony. So all of the, for our record and our docket, our file will be complete. We will provide to the commission, if the commission would be willing to receive such, we'll provide a proposed order to the commission to consider as the mechanism by which to grant the expedited treatment. And that way we'll cover all of the key decision-making points that we covered in our presentation this morning.
Thank you, Attorney Willoughby. Commissioner Thomas, did that answer your question, sir?
Yes, sir. I think that's a great idea.
All right. All right. So we've heard from all the parties except for the Office of Regulatory Staff, and I believe that the commissioners do not have any questions from the parties we've heard from thus far. So last but certainly not least, the Office of Regulatory Staff.
Thank you, Chairman. For today's proceedings regarding specifically expedited review, we can simply update the commission on ORS status with the applicant.
Attorney Hammonds, I hate to interrupt you, ma'am, but we cannot hear you very loudly, and you're a little muffled as well. If you could get close to your microphone, we would greatly appreciate it, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me better now?
That is a little better.
Thank you. For today's proceedings regarding expedited review, ORS would like to update the commission on our status and working with the applicants. ORS has reviewed the applications and the direct testimony filed by all the applicants. As you know, some of that direct testimony just came in, I think, the latter part of last week. For any information requests that were issued by ORS has reviewed those responses. And we are in communication with the applicants, and we're attempting to execute stipulations with each. Each applicant has been provided a stipulation at this point. We do have executed stipulations with some of the applicants. We have agreement in principle with some of the applicants and negotiating with another applicant. We intend to move forward, and our goal, of course, is to reach executed stipulations with each of the applicants. And pursuant to those stipulations, ORS would not object to expedited review of those applicants' requests. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Hammonds. All right. Are there any questions before we adjourn this proceeding?
Mr. Chairman.
Vice Chair Belzer.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Hammonds.
Good morning, Vice Chair.
I don't mean to put you or the parties on the spot, but do we have any timeline when negotiations and possible where we might know whether a stipulation has been reached or not? Do we have a timeline on that?
We do not have a hard deadline, Commissioner. We feel like we are very close to reaching executed stipulations with the parties, but I'm hesitant to give a date at this point since we haven't really agreed upon one.
I understand. It's just that, I mean, if you get the stipulations, please, I would ask they be filed, and if you're unable to reach one, would y'all let us know that y'all haven't reached a stipulation so we know when or not,
Absolutely.
whether or not we can act upon these applications?
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
May I inquire, and if you can't get into this, I understand, but with regard to the question about the plan and some of the reporting and record keeping that ORS must keep, does the stipulation assist y'all in the mapping requirements that Mr. Ellaby referenced?
The stipulation does address that issue.
And so it does address whatever reporting requirements ORS is responsible for the legislature. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, ma'am. We have specifically requested in the stipulation for the applicants to provide an estimated timeline for each census block it proposes to serve.
Okay. Well, and I know that y'all have some requirements that you have to get back to the legislature with, so that I'm assuming that you're taking care of that in your stipulations. So I appreciate that information. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. If there's nothing else, we are adjourned.
Thank you.